The throne room of the Syrian Empire was carved from obsidian, its towering spires reflecting the cold, merciless authority of a civilization that had once looked down upon humanity as little more than cosmic refuse. Standing at the center, beneath the empire's sigil of entwined silver serpents, was Nathaniel Cross, human, outcast, and now the legal husband of 4 alien princesses. The words still echoed in his mind. By decree of His Majesty, the late King Zyvar, the human known as Nathaniel Cross shall inherit all 4 of his daughters as consorts, in accordance with royal law. Silence clung to the chamber like a suffocating fog. The assembled nobility, adorned in their ceremonial battle robes, stared at Nathaniel as if he were some bizarre insect that had crawled onto their sacred altar. Then came the laughter. It started as a snicker, barely concealed behind a curled lip, before erupting into full-bodied amusement. Lords and ladies of the Syrian court doubled over, claws tapping against polished marble as they wheezed with mirth. Even the High Chancellor wiped a tear from his sharp crimson eyes. Nathaniel didn't move. He barely breathed. His gaze, however, locked onto the 4 alien princesses standing at the foot of the throne. Each bore the regal features of their father, sharp cheekbones, elongated pupils that glowed with a faint luminescence, and golden-hued skin that shimmered beneath the room's eerie blue lighting. But where their father had ruled with calculated cruelty, his daughters carried something else in their gazes: disgust. The eldest, Princess Vera, took a step forward. She was a warrior, her form wrapped in the segmented armor of the Syrian battle elite, her violet eyes ablaze with fury. Beautiful but lethal. "This is an outrage," she hissed, turning toward the court. "A human, a filthy, unblooded outsider, meant to claim us as—" She couldn't even finish the sentence before baring her fangs. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, suppressing the tightness in his chest. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what this was. One last insult from King Zyvar, a final slap in the face to his proud warrior daughters. They had mocked Earth, had called his people weak, insignificant, doomed to be forgotten by the stars. And yet, in death, their father had chained them to the very thing they despised. Perhaps the king had a reason. The second daughter, Princess Athea, murmured, her silver hair cascading over one shoulder. She was the tactician, the scholar. Her expression was calculating, lips pressed into a thin line, as if already formulating a way out of this mess. A reason. Vera snapped. "Yes, to humiliate us." The third, Princess Lyra, scoffed. "Or maybe to get revenge on him." Her glowing blue eyes flicked toward Nathaniel with amusement, as if this whole thing was some cosmic joke at his expense as well. He wasn't sure he disagreed. The fourth and youngest, Princess Selana, remained quiet. She was the most unreadable, her golden irises unreadable as they flickered between Nathaniel and her sisters. Nathaniel finally spoke. His voice was calm but edged with steel. "I didn't ask for this." Vera's eyes snapped back to him, venomous. "And yet you stand here, ready to claim us like some war trophy?" Something inside him flared at that. He took a deliberate step forward, his own presence, though human, unwavering. "You think I want to be here?" He let his voice rise, the weight of his frustration pressing against the stunned silence that followed. "You think I wanted to wake up this morning and suddenly find myself tied to the daughters of a man who nearly had me executed 2 years ago?" That shut them up. Even the court's laughter had died down, replaced by an uncomfortable murmur. Nathaniel clenched his fists. "I have no intention of forcing anything. I don't want power, I don't want status, and I sure as hell don't want to be married to anyone who despises me on sight. But the king's will is clear. So now we have a choice." His voice dropped lower, controlled but firm. "You can keep snarling at me like wild beasts, or we can figure out what the hell we're supposed to do next." The room tensed. Vera was still seething, but something unreadable flickered in her gaze. Athea looked thoughtful. Lyra smirked as if entertained. Selana remained unreadable. Then, from the far end of the room, the High Chancellor stepped forward. "It is law," he announced, voice echoing across the chamber. "The marriage stands." His crimson eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "And thus, the human shall now assume the title of royal consort of the Syrian Empire." The court erupted again, but this time, it was no laughter. It was outrage. Nathaniel barely had time to process it before Vera stormed past him, stopping only long enough to growl under her breath. "This isn't over, human." Athea followed, silent but analyzing. Lyra winked as she strolled past. "This is going to be fun." And Solana lingered, just for a second, her gaze holding something deeper, something unsettling. Then she was gone. Nathaniel exhaled sharply, barely noticing as the guards led him out of the throne room, toward the chambers that would now serve as his marital quarters for alien princesses, all bound to him by law, and not a single one of them wanted him there. As the heavy doors shut behind him, Nathaniel leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to his forehead. The king hadn't just left him a throne. He'd left him a ticking time bomb, and it had already begun to count down. Nathaniel's new quarters were a gilded prison. The moment the towering door sealed behind him, he took a slow, measured breath, forcing his pulse to settle. The suite was lavish, polished obsidian floors, intricate tapestries depicting Xerian conquests, and a sprawling balcony that overlooked the Empire's capital, Vorthal Prime. A place of power, draped in luxury. Yet all he could see were the shackles wrapped around his future. A marriage to 4 alien princesses, for women who despised him, or at the very least, wanted nothing to do with him. The late king had ensured it, binding his daughters in a final, twisted display of dominance even from the grave. Nathaniel ran a hand through his dark hair, exhaling sharply. He wasn't a fool. This wasn't just some ceremonial arrangement. This was a battlefield, and he was outnumbered. A sharp knock snapped him from his thoughts. The door slid open without his permission. Princess Vera stood at the threshold, her violet eyes burning with barely contained fury. Her armored form was tense, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. Nathaniel didn't move. He simply crossed his arms and met her glare. "You're not exactly giving off honeymoon energy," he said dryly. She didn't laugh, didn't even smirk. Instead, she stepped inside and let the door shut behind her with an ominous finality. "This ends," she said, voice like a blade against stone. "Now." Nathaniel arched an eyebrow. "Which part? The part where I exist, or the part where your father made sure I'll be a permanent stain on your record?" She ignored the jab. "You don't belong here, human. The court sees you as a joke. The generals whisper about a weak-blooded outsider sitting in the Empire's halls. If you stay, you won't just humiliate us. You'll make yourself a target." He took a slow step forward, watching her closely. "And what exactly are you proposing?" Vera's hands clenched into fists. "Annulment. A legal loophole. You'll leave, and this mistake will be forgotten." He considered her for a long moment. Then, without breaking eye contact, he walked past her toward the balcony. The cold night air rushed over his skin as he gripped the railing, looking down at the city below. "You really think it's that simple?" he murmured. "That your father didn't anticipate someone trying to undo this?" Vera stiffened. "You're a warrior," he continued. "You know the battlefield better than most. Do you really think a man like King Zyvar, who orchestrated entire planetary conquests, would leave a loophole in his final decree?" The silence behind him was answer enough. Nathaniel turned back around. "Face it, princess. You're stuck with me." Her jaw tightened. For the first time, there was something behind her eyes that wasn't outright contempt, something closer to reluctant realization. Then, just as quickly, she masked it with frustration. "You may be bound by law," she said, stepping closer, "but don't think for a second that makes you my equal." Nathaniel let out a soft chuckle. "I wouldn't dream of it." She scoffed, pivoting on her heel. "Stay out of my way, human. And don't think for a second that sharing a title makes us anything more than prisoners of the same cage." With that, she was gone, the door hissing shut behind her. Nathaniel exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. 1 down. 3 to go. Hours later, he should have been asleep. Instead, he found himself wandering the dimly lit corridors of the palace, his thoughts tangled in knots. The air smelled of foreign metals and exotic spices. The quiet hum of the Empire's advanced technology laced beneath every breath. Then a whisper of movement. He turned just as Princess Athea emerged from a side chamber, a tablet in hand, eyes scanning data streams of shifting Xyrian script. Unlike Vera's battle-ready stance, Athea carried herself with precision, every movement calculated. "You don't sleep," she observed, not looking up. "Neither do you," he countered. A small smirk ghosted over her lips. "Too much to do. Our father left complications." Nathaniel leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "And I'm one of them." Athea finally lifted her gaze. Unlike her older sister, she wasn't filled with raw hostility. No, her expression was one of curiosity. "You're an anomaly," she admitted. "A human, surviving in a court that would rather see you dead than share their bloodline." "And yet, here we are," Nathaniel said. She tilted her head. "Do you wonder why my father did this?" "Every damn second." Athea studied him. "Then perhaps we share a common goal, understanding what game he was playing." Nathaniel arched a brow. "You don't want out of this marriage." Athea smirked. "I didn't say that. But unlike my sister, I prefer to dismantle a problem strategically, not through brute force." There was something unsettling about her gaze. She wasn't just looking at him. She was studying him, measuring every word, every breath. Before he could speak again, she took a step back. "We'll talk again soon, Nathaniel Cross." Then, just like Vera, she vanished into the shadows. Nathaniel let out a slow exhale, the weight of his new reality settling deeper into his bones. One princess saw him as a disgrace, another as a puzzle to be solved, and that left two more. His grip tightened at his sides. This wasn't just a political farce. It was a battlefield, and if he didn't play his cards right, it wouldn't be the Xyrian court that destroyed him. It would be the women bound to him by law. And something told him that one of them wouldn't wait for a legal escape. They'd take matters into their own hands, one way or another. Nathaniel Cross had never felt more out of place. Seated at the head of a grand obsidian table, he faced the assembled elite of the Xyrian Empire, their expressions ranging from barely veiled disdain to outright hostility. The Council of Lords had gathered in response to the late king's final decree, his enforced marriage to the four princesses, a decision that had thrown the empire into chaos. At his left sat Princess Vera, her jaw clenched so tightly he could almost hear her teeth grinding. At his right, Athea leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, unreadable as ever. The two sisters weren't allies, but for now, they were united in a singular belief. He didn't belong here. "Let's not waste time." A deep, guttural voice cut through the room. Lord Kael'var, one of the Empire's highest-ranking generals, folded his massive arms. His four reptilian eyes studied Nathaniel with barely concealed contempt. "Your presence here is an insult. The Council demands to know your true purpose." Nathaniel exhaled slowly, keeping his expression neutral. "You think I asked for this?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. Kael'var's lip curled. "Convenient, isn't it? A human suddenly bound to our throne, given power he did not earn. Tell me, Cross, what leverage did you use to manipulate the late king?" Nathaniel's patience frayed. He sat forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. "If you think I wanted to be shackled to a throne no one wants me on, then you're either blind or willfully ignorant. But here's the reality, General. I am here. You can fight it all you want, but I'm not going anywhere." The tension in the room thickened. Vera spoke before Kael'var could. "The law binds him to the Empire, but it does not dictate his role. We could assign him to a ceremonial position, out of sight, out of mind." Nathaniel snorted. "So, exile within the palace. Clever." Athea finally joined the conversation, her tone deceptively light. "It would be the cleanest solution. No bloodshed, no rebellion. A quiet life for you, far from the real power of the court." Nathaniel studied her, searching for the trap. Athea never spoke without intent. She wasn't suggesting exile. She was testing him. "I appreciate the offer," he said, voice dry, "but I don't plan on fading into the background." Kael'var slammed a fist against the table. "Then you are a threat." Nathaniel held his gaze. "If you make me one." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the doors to the chamber swung open. A woman strode inside, flanked by 2 armed guards. Princess Lyrian, the third of his unwilling brides, where Vera radiated raw defiance and Athea wielded intellect like a dagger. Lyrian carried herself with cold, unshaken authority. Dressed in deep crimson, her gaze swept across the room with the air of someone who had already decided the conversation was beneath her. She barely glanced at Nathaniel. "You're wasting time," she said, her voice like silk wrapped around iron. "This charade has already spiraled into absurdity. The Empire is fracturing, and we're here debating a human's place in it." Kael'var inclined his head. "Then you agree, Princess? He should be removed from power?" Lyrian's dark gaze flickered to Nathaniel, unreadable. "I agree that he's irrelevant, but focusing on him distracts from the real issue. Our father's final decree wasn't just about this marriage. There is something larger at play, something we are missing." A murmur spread through the room. Nathaniel's skin prickled. Lyrian was right. King Zyvar hadn't been the kind of ruler to make decisions on a whim. There was more to this. He could feel it. But before he could speak, Lyrian turned fully to face him for the first time. "I have no interest in being your wife, human," she said, voice cool. "But I will give you one piece of advice. Watch your back. Not everyone in this court will wait for a legal solution to their problems." Nathaniel met her stare. "Then I'll have to be ready for them." Something flickered in her eyes. Not approval. Not quite. But something close. Lyrian didn't linger. She pivoted smoothly and strode from the chamber, leaving the tension in her wake. Vera stood abruptly. "This is pointless. If we're done pretending he matters, I have duties elsewhere." She left without another word. Athea followed, offering Nathaniel a parting smirk that felt more like a warning than amusement. Kael'var cast one last glare before storming out with the remaining council members. And just like that, Nathaniel was alone. Later that night, Nathaniel returned to his quarters, his thoughts a tangled mess of half-formed theories and warnings he couldn't ignore. He poured himself a drink, something strong, alien, and burning, and leaned against the balcony railing. "You handled yourself well today." He turned sharply. Princess Lyrian stood in the shadows of his chamber, her arms folded, her gaze unreadable. Nathaniel tensed. "You're not exactly subtle." "I don't need to be." She stepped into the moonlight, the silver glow casting sharp angles across her face. "I came to offer you an opportunity." He narrowed his eyes. "What kind of opportunity?" Lyrian tilted her head slightly, considering him. "You want to survive this? Then you need to stop playing defense. You need to start learning the game." Nathaniel's grip on the glass tightened. "And you're offering to teach me?" A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "I'm offering you a choice. Stay blind to the Empire's true dangers, or start seeing the board for what it is." He exhaled slowly. "And what do you get out of this?" "Leverage," she admitted, "and perhaps an ally who isn't bound by Zirian blood." A dangerous proposal. A tempting one. Nathaniel set his glass down, turning to fully face her. "Then let's start with lesson 1. Who's coming for me first?" Lyrian's smirk deepened. "Why assume they haven't already?" The cold weight of reality settled into his bones. He wasn't just a political pawn. He was a target. And if he didn't move fast, someone would remove him from the board entirely. Nathaniel Cross had spent his life in war zones, on battlefields where the rules were written in blood and steel. But this was a battlefield of whispers and knives in the dark. The Zirian palace gleamed under the twin moons, its obsidian spires stretching toward the stars. From the balcony of his private chamber, he could see the faint glow of the capital beyond the palace walls, a city as restless as the Empire itself. Somewhere within those walls, someone was already plotting his downfall. Lyrian's words from the previous night still echoed in his mind. Why assume they haven't already? A lesson wrapped in a warning. Nathaniel turned from the balcony, his senses sharpening as he stepped back into his quarters. The air felt too still. Something was wrong. He barely had time to react before a figure lunged from the shadows. Fast, silent, deadly. Nathaniel twisted just in time, the assassin's blade slicing through the air where his throat had been a second before. No hesitation. This wasn't a warning. It was an execution. Instinct took over. He dodged the second strike, driving his elbow into the attacker's ribs. The assassin barely reacted, shifting seamlessly into another attack. Trained, precise, merciless. Nathaniel snatched the nearest object, a heavy glass decanter, and smashed it across the assassin's temple. The impact sent them staggering back, and in that brief opening, Nathaniel seized the knife from their grasp. The assassin lunged again, unarmed but undeterred. Nathaniel caught them mid-motion, twisting the stolen blade against their throat. A flicker of hesitation. The figure stilled. Then a voice, soft, familiar, dangerous. Impressive. Nathaniel's grip tightened as Athea smirked up at him, her eyes gleaming even as the blade hovered against her skin. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. She arched a brow, proving a point. He released her with a sharp exhale, stepping back as she rolled her shoulders, like she hadn't just tried to kill him. "You're quick," she admitted, tilting her head. "Quicker than I expected." Nathaniel's pulse still pounded, but he forced himself to focus. "I should put you through that damn wall for pulling a stunt like this." Athea merely chuckled, brushing a strand of silver-white hair from her face. "That would be unwise. Unless, of course, you want the council to believe you attacked me." Nathaniel ground his teeth. She wasn't just testing his reflexes. She was testing his ability to survive. "Who sent you?" he asked, crossing his arms. Athea's smile was all sharp edges. "No one. If they had, you wouldn't be breathing right now." Nathaniel wasn't sure whether that was a compliment or a threat. She prowled closer, her movements deliberate, assessing. "You're not useless, I'll give you that. But brute strength won't be enough to keep you alive in this palace. You need to start thinking like a Zirian." "Like a viper in the grass?" "Exactly." Nathaniel sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "So what now? Another assassination attempt at dawn?" Athea smirked. "No need. You're already in enough danger as it is." Her expression darkened slightly. "There are those in the council who see your presence as an infection, something that must be cut out before it spreads." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "And I suppose you're here to offer me a cure?" Athea's gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, her usual amusement faded. "No, Nathaniel. I'm here to see if you can survive long enough to find one yourself." Later that night, sleep was impossible. Nathaniel sat on the edge of his bed, replaying Athea's words over and over. He wasn't just an inconvenience. He was a liability, a threat, and the moment the council decided he wasn't worth the trouble, they wouldn't hesitate to remove him. A knock at his door shattered his thoughts. His body tensed. He hadn't expected anyone, not at this hour. Hand resting near his belt, where he had stashed the assassin's blade, he moved to the door and opened it cautiously. Lyrian stood on the other side. Unlike before, she wasn't wearing her usual armor of indifference. There was something almost guarded about her. "We need to talk." Nathaniel stepped aside, letting her in. She moved with the same grace as before, but tonight, her presence felt different, less distant. She glanced around his quarters, her eyes briefly flickering to the remnants of broken glass on the floor. "An eventful evening?" Nathaniel huffed. "You could say that." Lyrian turned to face him fully. "Then I'll make this simple. The attacks won't stop." Nathaniel folded his arms. "Tell me something I don't know." Lyrian sighed. "The council is divided. Some want you removed quietly. Others see an opportunity." He raised a brow. "And you?" Her expression didn't waver. "I see a man caught in a war he didn't start. One who doesn't yet understand his place in it." Nathaniel held her gaze. "And I suppose you're here to help me find that place?" Lyrian took a slow step forward. "I'm here to make sure you don't die before you do." A charged silence settled between them. Nathaniel wasn't sure when the conversation had shifted, or when the distance between them had closed. But suddenly, she was too close, and he wasn't moving away. Lyrian studied him, her dark eyes searching. Then, barely above a whisper, "Do you even want this throne, Nathaniel?" He hesitated. The truth was no. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted to be bound to an empire that saw him as an invader. But the moment they decided to kill him, it became a war he couldn't afford to lose. Finally, he answered, I don't know what I want yet, but I do know I won't let them bury me before I figure it out. Something in Lyrian's gaze softened. Just a fraction. Good. And then, so fast he barely registered it. She reached out. Her fingers ghosted over his wrist, just for a second. A touch too brief to be accidental. Then, just as smoothly, she stepped back. This is the last time we speak like this, she said. The next time we meet, it will be in court. And there we will be enemies. Nathaniel exhaled. I'll try to act surprised. Lyrian smirked, but there was something else in it now. Something unreadable. And then, without another word, she was gone, leaving Nathaniel standing in the quiet, staring at the place where she had been, trying to decide if he had just gained an ally, or if he had just been marked for death.